The city had walls thicker than houses. Stone so old that people believed they would stand forever. From the battlements, defenders watched the Roman army arrive and felt relief. There were no ladders rushing forward. No wild charge. No desperate attack. Instead, the Romans stopped. They measured the ground. They marked distances in the dirt. They cut trees. They built frames of wood, slowly, calmly, just outside arrow range. At first, it did not look like war. It looked like construction. But the sound came next. The deep creak of timber under tension. The heavy knock of iron being fitted into place. The steady rhythm of hundreds of men working in silence, not with anger, but with purpose. Hours passed. Then days. The defenders realized something too late. The Romans were not here to fight them. They were here to erase the city. When the first stone flew, it was larger than a cartwheel. When it landed, a section of wall that had stood for centuries simply vanished. Not cracked. Not damaged. Gone. Houses collapsed without warning. Men died without ever seeing the weapon that killed them. Walls that once meant safety became traps of stone and dust. The worst part was not the destruction. It was the waiting. They could hear the machines being prepared. They could see the angles being adjusted. They knew exactly where the next blow would land. This was not chaos. This was calculation. Rome did not starve cities into surrender. Rome took them apart, piece by piece, until nothing remained but rubble, silence, and mass graves. And once the machines were finished, surrender was no longer a choice. It was only a question of how long the city would be allowed to exist. Stay with us till the end for valuable insights. Like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. For most ancient cities, walls were not just stone. They were hope. A city's walls meant protection, survival, and pride. They stood for generations. Children grew old beneath their shadow. Fathers taught their sons that as long as the walls stood, the city lived. Enemies could come. Armies could surround them. But stone would endure where men could not. This belief shaped how people thought about war. When an enemy appeared, defenders climbed the walls. They closed the gates. They waited. History had taught them that time favored the city. Attackers grew tired. Supplies ran out. Disease spread through camps. Eventually, the enemy left. This worked against many powers. But Rome was different. When Roman armies arrived, they did not rush forward. They did not shout challenges or test the walls with reckless attacks. Instead, they stopped at a careful distance. Beyond the range of arrows. Beyond easy resistance. And then they began to build. At first, defenders felt confused, even relieved. No assault came. No ladders. No fires. Roman soldiers dug trenches, leveled ground, and cut trees. Wagons rolled back and forth carrying timber, iron, and rope. The work never stopped. Day and night, the sound of construction filled the air. The defenders watched from above, unsure what to make of it. They soon learned. Roman engineers were not ordinary soldiers. They were planners, builders, and thinkers. They studied the city's walls the way a craftsman studies broken stone. They measured thickness. They observed angles. They noted weak points where mortar had aged or repairs had been rushed long ago. The walls that once felt eternal suddenly felt examined. Every movement below was calm, ordered, methodical. Roman warfare did not rely on courage alone. It relied on preparation. Where other armies hoped the walls would fail, Rome planned for it. As the days passed, strange wooden frames rose from the ground. Large beams were fitted together with iron pins. Ropes were twisted tighter and tighter until they hummed with tension. Heavy coverings were added, sloped and layered, designed to resist fire. Defenders began to feel something worse than fear. They felt certainty. These machines were not temporary. They were not desperate tools. They were carefully designed instruments meant for one purpose only: to dismantle the city. The Romans were not asking if the walls could be broken. They already knew the answer. From the battlements, defenders realized a terrible truth. Their walls were no longer shields. They were targets. Each stone, each gate, each tower had become a problem waiting to be solved. And Rome solved problems. Slowly. Patiently. Without mercy. By the time the first weapon was fully assembled, the defenders understood that this siege would not end with hunger or negotiation. It would end with stone collapsing into dust. And the city would fall, not by force of will, but by force of engineering. The first impact did not sound like thunder. It sounded heavier. A deep, crushing crack echoed across the city as a massive stone slammed into the wall. Dust burst outward like smoke. For a moment, the wall held. Defenders shouted in relief. Then the second stone hit. This time, the wall answered with a low groan, like something alive being wounded. Mortar fell in thick chunks. Stones shifted. Men standing nearby felt the vibration travel through their feet and into their bones. This was not an attack meant to frighten. This was an attack meant to change the shape of the city. Roman siege engines worked slowly, but they never stopped. Crews rotated in silence. When one group grew tired, another took its place. The machines did not rest. Daylight made no difference. Darkness made no difference. Each stone followed calculation. Roman engineers adjusted angles. They changed torsion levels. They corrected distances. Every shot was a test, and every test made the next strike more precise. Where the wall cracked, the next stone struck again. And again. Always the same place. Defenders tried to repair the damage. They ran forward with tools and fresh mortar. They stacked stones and wooden braces, hoping to slow the collapse. Many never returned. Flat flying bolts cut through the air without warning. Men fell where they stood, pinned to the stone behind them. Others were crushed when fragments of wall gave way without notice. Some died without seeing the weapon that killed them. The wall, once a place of safety, became a killing ground. People inside the city began to understand the danger of being near the defenses. Homes close to the walls were abandoned. Families moved deeper into the city, hoping distance would save them. It did not. High arcing stones began to fall beyond the walls. Roofs collapsed. Streets disappeared under rubble. Entire buildings folded inward as if struck by invisible hands. The sound came first, a sharp crack, then a heavy crash, then silence broken by screams. No place felt safe anymore. The worst part was knowing what came next. Roman artillery followed patterns. Defenders noticed it. They could feel it. After a pause, another stone would come. After another pause, another strike. The waiting became unbearable. Men stared at the sky, unable to move, unsure whether to run or drop flat. At night, it was worse. The stones could not be seen. Only the sound warned them, a sharp snap followed by terror. People froze, trapped between choices. Run, and risk being hit. Stay, and risk being buried alive. Sleep became impossible. Days blurred together. Exhaustion spread faster than hunger. Fear aged men overnight. Some defenders refused to take their positions. Others deserted their posts entirely. And still, the machines continued. Roman siege warfare was not fast. It was thorough. It was not driven by rage. It was driven by certainty. The walls were dying. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But stone by stone, under pressure that never stopped. And everyone inside the city knew the truth. This was only the beginning. At first, the city still felt familiar. Markets opened when they could. People whispered prayers. Families stayed together. Everyone believed that if they endured long enough, something might change. Perhaps the Romans would grow tired. Perhaps help would come. But siege warfare was designed to erase hope slowly. As Roman machines continued their work, the city began to change. Streets once full of life became narrow paths between ruins. Familiar buildings collapsed or burned, leaving landmarks unrecognizable. Dust filled the air, settling on food, clothing, and skin. People learned new rules for survival. Never stay near the walls. Never stay under open sky. Never stand still for too long. Even these rules failed. Roman artillery crews learned the rhythm of the city. They watched movement. They observed repairs. They targeted people, not just stone. Anyone who tried to fix damage or organize defenders drew attention. Precision bolts struck officers and leaders first. Standard bearers fell. Messengers died before reaching their destinations. The city was not just being destroyed. It was being silenced. Defenders realized their walls had betrayed them. The thick stone reflected impacts inward. When stones struck, fragments flew into the city itself. Buildings near the defenses collapsed inward, crushing those inside. The walls that once blocked danger now multiplied it. Inside homes, people huddled together. Children covered their ears. Adults counted time by impacts instead of hours. Every loud crack made hearts race. Every pause felt like the moment before death. The psychological pressure grew heavier than hunger. Men who once stood proudly on the walls now refused to approach them. They flinched at shadows. Loud sounds sent people running. Some stared without speaking, their eyes fixed on nothing. The city had become a prison. Roman engineers increased their pressure. Multiple weapons worked together. While heavy stones smashed one section of wall, bolts rained down on anyone who tried to respond. When defenders moved to a safer area, artillery followed them. No position remained secure for long. At night, the fear deepened. Fires burned unchecked because no one dared approach them. Repairs stopped entirely. Roman crews continued working under torchlight while defenders listened helplessly from within. The sound of construction was almost worse than the weapons themselves. It meant tomorrow would be worse than today. People began to talk about surrender. Not openly. Not loudly. But the thought spread. Parents looked at their children and wondered how long the city could survive. Soldiers whispered about whether resistance still meant honor or only death. The Romans did not demand surrender. They did not need to. Their machines spoke for them. Each impact said the same thing. This city is already finished. You are only choosing how long you suffer. As days passed, sections of wall became unstable. Cracks widened. Stones shifted. Defenders marked weak points, knowing exactly where the collapse would come. And once that happened, there would be no stopping what followed. Everyone inside the city understood it. The siege was no longer about winning. It was about waiting for the moment the city ceased to exist. There was a sound every defender learned to fear. It was not loud at first. Not dramatic. Just a deep, slow creak of wood under pressure. That sound meant the Romans were ready. Behind their lines, Roman crews prepared the machines that would touch the walls directly. Heavy frames rolled forward under thick coverings. Iron plates reflected fire. Wet hide soaked in water dulled burning arrows. Nothing the defenders tried could stop the advance. The battering ram came last. It looked simple. A massive tree trunk, stripped of its branches, capped with iron shaped like an animal's head. It hung from chains inside a wooden shelter, protected on all sides. To defenders, it looked like a beast crawling toward the gate. When it reached the wall, the city held its breath. The first strike was measured. Controlled. The second followed the same rhythm. Soon, the pounding became constant. Each impact echoed through the streets. Stone dust fell from ceilings. Doors shook in their frames. Children cried at every strike. Adults counted them without meaning to. 1, 2, 3. There was no escape from the sound. Roman crews rotated in perfect order. When one group tired, another took its place. The ram never stopped swinging. The gate cracked. Metal screamed. Stone splintered. Defenders tried to fight back. They lowered heavy materials to absorb the blows. They dropped hooks to catch the iron head. Some brave men rushed forward, trying to burn the shelter or break the chains. Most did not return. Bolts struck them before they reached the ram. Stones fell from above. Fire slid harmlessly off sloped roofs. Roman engineering had already planned for every defense. The pounding continued. Hours passed. Then days. The gate weakened. Cracks spread like veins. The sound changed, becoming hollow. Defenders knew what that meant. The barrier between the city and the Roman army was failing. Inside the city, panic spread. People gathered belongings they could carry. Some prayed. Some shouted. Some sat in silence, waiting for what they knew was coming. When the gate finally broke, it was sudden. One final strike. A sharp crack. Then collapse. The ram burst through, dragging debris with it. Dust filled the air. Light poured into places that had been sealed for generations. And behind that dust waited Roman soldiers. They did not rush in wildly. They advanced in formation. Shields raised. Weapons ready. The breach was not chaos. It was controlled entry. Resistance collapsed almost immediately. What followed was not a battle. It was a consequence. The machines had done their work. The walls had fallen. The city's fate had been decided long before the first Roman soldier stepped inside. The sound of the ram faded. In its place came screams, fire, and silence. The siege was over. After the walls failed, the city did not fall all at once. It collapsed from the inside. Roman soldiers moved through the streets with discipline, not haste. They had trained for this moment. They knew where resistance might gather. They knew which streets led to open squares and which narrowed into traps. Their movements followed planning done long before the first stone ever flew. Inside the city, defenders tried to organize one last stand. They gathered in broken buildings, behind fallen walls, anywhere that still offered cover. But the siege had already taken everything they needed to fight. Ammunition was gone. Strength was gone. Most of all, belief was gone. Roman artillery did not stop after the breach. Bolts continued to fly over the walls and into the city itself. Any group of defenders that gathered too long drew attention. One man would fall, then another. The survivors would scatter, leaving weapons behind. There was no safe place to regroup. The city was filled with smoke and dust. Fires burned unchecked. Narrow streets became death traps as collapsing buildings blocked escape. People ran until they could not breathe anymore. Some hid. Some surrendered. Some fought knowing it would change nothing. Roman engineers had designed the siege to reach this exact moment. The machines had destroyed not only walls, but time. Defenders had no chance to rest, no chance to think clearly. Fear had worn them down long before the soldiers arrived. In many places, resistance simply stopped. Men dropped their weapons and sat down. Others fled into buildings and refused to come out. Some defenders chose death over capture, believing there was no future left either way. The Romans moved forward steadily. They did not chase every person. They secured positions. They controlled intersections. They blocked escape routes. The city became smaller with every hour. By nightfall, organized defense no longer existed. What remained was survival. Families searched for each other among ruins. The injured cried out from beneath rubble. Fires lit the sky, marking the end of places that had stood for centuries. The machines outside the city stood silent now. Their work was finished. Roman siege warfare was never about speed at the end. It was about certainty. Once the breach happened, the outcome was already decided. The real battle had been fought days earlier, between stone and calculation. By morning, the city belonged to Rome. Its walls were broken. Its streets were silent. Its people were either dead, captured, or scattered. The siege weapons that had done this were already being dismantled. Timber was reused. Iron was collected. Roman engineers prepared to move on. Another city would be next. For Rome, this was not cruelty. It was process. Long after the fires burned out, the city still did not feel empty. Broken walls stood like scars. Streets were buried under stone and ash. Buildings that had once held laughter and life now stood open to the sky, torn apart by forces no one inside had been able to stop. The silence was heavy. Roman soldiers moved through the ruins, counting, recording, securing what remained. Engineers walked among the destruction they had created, studying collapsed walls and shattered gates. They spoke calmly, pointing at cracks, discussing what had worked and what could be improved next time. For them, this was not horror. It was education. Roman siege warfare was never just about taking one city. Every siege was a lesson. Every collapse taught them something new about stone, wood, weight, and pressure. Every conquered city made the next siege faster, more efficient, more certain. This is why Rome became unstoppable. Word traveled faster than armies ever could. Survivors told stories. Traders whispered warnings. Messengers carried news from city to city. They spoke of machines that never rested. Of stones that crushed houses from the sky. Of walls that betrayed those who trusted them. They spoke of the waiting. Of hearing construction for days, knowing exactly what was coming, and being powerless to stop it. Of realizing that bravery meant nothing against engines built with patience and knowledge. Cities began to surrender before the machines were finished. Some surrendered as soon as Roman engineers arrived. Others surrendered when they saw the first weapon take shape. A few waited until the first stone flew. Very few waited until the walls began to fall. Rome understood something no other power fully grasped. Fear was strongest when it was logical. Roman siege weapons did not rely on surprise. They relied on visibility. Defenders were meant to see them, to hear them, to understand them. The machines announced their purpose long before they struck. They gave cities time to think. And that thinking broke more resistance than any blade. This is why Roman warfare changed the ancient world. It proved that walls were no longer promises. They were delays. That courage without preparation was meaningless. That engineering could decide the fate of entire populations. The weapons did not just destroy cities. They destroyed certainty. After Rome, no wall ever felt completely safe again. When Roman standards appeared on the horizon, leaders faced a choice that haunted generations. Surrender early and live under Roman rule, or resist and watch everything be taken apart piece by piece. Many chose surrender. Those who did not became warnings. Their cities disappeared from maps. Their names survived only in records of conquest. Their walls became lessons written in rubble. Roman siege warfare did more than win battles. It reshaped how humanity understood power. It showed that the future belonged not only to the strongest soldiers, but to the minds that could turn wood, rope, and stone into instruments of absolute control. When Rome came for a city, the outcome was never truly in doubt. The only question was how long the city would be allowed to stand before the machines finished their work.